It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. Take Command Podcast. Craig Hoffman, Logan Paulsen. Logan, how was your Christmas?
It was excellent, man. Very low key, and we got to do like the local Christmas and do like Zoom or FaceTime some my parents in. Did Christmas with them. Did Christmas with my in-laws. So it was a good day, man. Really relaxing. And you, how was yours?
It was good. Just very chill. Lot of flipping back and forth between the football and the basketball because the football games weren't that exciting. Clearly, I mean, Beyonce threw 10 touchdown passes in Houston, so that was cool. That was an incredible show. Congratulations to Netflix for getting your buffering situation figured out by the time everybody was watching. But yeah, no, it was a good, relaxing day in the Hoffman household. A little bit of Atlanta Falcons, New York Giants watching happened early in the day, so that brought down the average, if you will. But we're going to talk about the Commanders against the Falcons today, of course. And by the way, Logan, I have bad news for you if you haven't looked at the weather report for the weekend.
I'm not. No.
You might need your rain gear on the sideline.
Oh, God. Buddy. Okay. Yeah. Here we go. Rain gear. Let's make it happen.
Sunday night football after it was rain. They're going to have the tarp on the field the entire weekend. So the folks that work in Landover, I hope either the tarp was left on or sorry, you're going to have to go to work and put the tarp on because it is going to rain on Saturday. It is going to rain apparently most of the day on Sunday. Now, it might stop during the game, but I do think that is something perhaps to keep in mind as we get into the preview here is there might be some weather factors, and it will if it does rain up into the game, Logan. It's going to affect my Sunday big time. Anthony and I were going to be perusing the parking lots.
That's right.
We were going to be vlogging. We were going to be tailgating. We were going to do it. I'm not doing that in the rain. I'm a wuss. I'm getting inside. I don't need to get like there. We can do that another time for content. I guess we're out of home games, but we'll find another time to hang out with the fans, or we can hang out indoors. We'll go walk around the concourse or something. But we can't be doing.
The concourse walk's probably good. That'd work.
Yeah, because I can't just be sitting there in the press box damp the entire game because I was running around the parking lots all soaking wet.
I wonder what we're going to do for the broadcast, the radio broadcast. That'll be interesting because my producer said if it's really bad, then you just come up and hang out in here because the mics get a little bit temperamental. So it's
the technology in the rain. Famously, electricity and water mix great.
We'll see what happens with that.
London Bram, scoot over. You got a Paulson-sized addition to the booth.
That's right.
All right. So we'll see what happens on that, and obviously that could impact the game as well. But when we look at it, the schematics, the personnel, the usual things that we look at in the preview, Logan, let's start off with the Commanders offense against a Falcons defense that has some really talented players. They're coming off a big week production-wise where they had 2 pick sixes, one by Jesse Bates and then one on a tip-up and then recovery by Matthew Judon. Obviously, the Commanders coming off scoring 36 points against the number 1 defense in the league, but that was in a game where they had 5 turnovers. So take your good and your bad there. What's the big thing that sticks out in terms of the Atlanta defense that you're looking at if you're Kliff Kingsbury leading the offensive meetings this week?
Yeah, so obviously this is a defense that comes from the Vic Fangio tree. Like it was in LA, they kind of are the Joe Staley derivative, where it's like not exactly what Vic Fangio, Brandon Staley, excuse me, but it's a little bit the same, right? So they want to play a lot of kind of split safeties on early downs, and obviously there are exceptions to that. For example, like in the Minnesota game, they get gashed a little bit early. With Minnesota run the football. So they say, hey, we're going to get into like some single high stuff. So they do adjust, but they kind of want to start in some type of quarter-ish type structure. And they do it a little bit differently. Like one of the safeties gets down a little bit and you can tell he's the one that's like the run fit player. And usually it's to like the nub side of the field or the tight end side of the field or the run strength, however you want to call that. But yeah, I think it's in some ways that having this game after Philly is probably really, really good because there are a lot of similarities in terms of how they play their coverages, right? So like, I think you were telling me that, there's some statistic where 78% of the snaps, they play zone or something like that. And I think that is somewhat misleading because to me it is zone, but it is this match principle that you get from teams like Philadelphia, right? So all the stuff that you had in versus Philly, I think plays pretty well versus Atlanta because even though schematically they're the same, they do not execute it the same. And so what I mean by that is when you look at Philly, they do such a great job with their 4-man pass rush. They do a great job with their coverages in the back end. They have two really excellent linebackers that can get underneath stuff and really put you in a tough spot. Their nickel player is really, really good. So all the kind of their hook players are really good athletes and really fast. And when you watch Atlanta, it doesn't pop the same way. And I think you were talking about that in our little production meeting before. And I think that's 100% true. Like, they can't stop the run quite as well. They can't rush the passer quite as well. They don't cover quite as well. They do have weapons and playmakers, which we'll talk about in a second. But to me, it's basically like a low-def version with some slight tweaks, right? Like, I think we were talking about this too in the production meeting. Like, on third down, like, they play a ton of straight man-to-man coverage. And I thought, maybe it's because they're playing the New York Giants. But they do the same thing versus the Minnesota Vikings. And you're kind of like, whoa. And I think really the motivation
Which, by the way, what a choice that is.
That is a choice.
And it worked out exactly like you would think. I think Sam Darnold had 6 touchdowns or 5 in that game, to 3 to Addison, 2 to Jefferson. So
yeah, and so
it didn't go great.
Did not go great. And so, again, I think they're trying to free up Jesse Bates to kind of be that, like, lurk player, in that cover 3. So instead of a plug player, the safety's going to kind of be in there, read the quarterback's eyes. And that's effective for him because he does make a lot of plays on the football. So if that's the motivation, I understand that. But it just seems like you're leveraging your coverage a lot on third down. And we'll talk about that more specifically in a second. But basically, think of them as Philadelphia, but, like, not as good, obviously. Like, schematically, very similar. They play an odd front. They play kind of similar coverage structures. They're just not as good at it as Philadelphia.
So some numbers from Next Gen Stats from NFL Pro to kind of illuminate some of this. Jayden Daniels has completed 74.7. Actually, this is an interesting stat overall, and there's a couple of different numbers in this. Talk about the man zone thing, the high risk versus a high reward type of nature of man coverage. So Jayden has completed 74.7% of his passes against zone coverage this year, which is the 3rd highest completion percentage in the NFL. However, he's 8 touchdowns to 7 picks against zone. Against man, he's completed only 58.3% of his passes, so less than 60% compared to 75%. However, 14 touchdowns, 1 pick against man coverage. His 14 touchdowns against man are 7th most in the NFL. The Falcons, here's their side of the number, have played zone coverage on 78% of dropbacks this season, the 5th highest in the league. Opposing passers have averaged just 6.5 air yards per attempt against the Falcons zone in 2024. 5th fewest in the NFL. And I think this shows up because, like, if you watch them play this zone, like, teams will take what they give, and they'll give up the short stuff, and then it's up to the receivers to try to make some plays. If you look at even, like, the box score for the Giants game, like, a ton of the yardage comes from yak because they're just trying to check it down, let guys run. But Atlanta is good enough at rallying and tackling that's a hard way to live. But if you can do that for 1st and 2nd down, get them to 3rd down in man coverage, now you can take some shots. And I was watching the touchdown reel this morning, and I was stunned at how often touchdowns against the Falcons this season come on 3rd down. And that's especially true, I think, in the red zone.
Yeah, 100%. And, like, it's just stylistically, like, a surprising choice to me to play that much man on 3rd down and to be that consistent with it. Like, there's teams that play a lot of man. Like, I think the Commanders, they play a fair amount of man on 3rd down, especially with Marshawn Lattimore kind of entering the chat, so to speak. But they do throw in enough.
The Gen Z lingo.
I know, look at me. And then, but they do throw in enough wrinkles with zone where they're showing man, they get to Tampa 2, they get to some type of drop 8, and it's not like Atlanta doesn't do that. It's just they don't do it as much as I would expect someone to do. Like, if they had, like, elite coverage players, like their coverage guys on the perimeter are fine. Like, they're good players. Like, are they the best in the NFL? No. Are they the worst in the NFL? No. They're, like, kind of right in the middle, maybe a little bit plus, whatever you want to. I'm saying on the perimeter, the corners and the nickel. Yeah. But you're just leveraging those guys a ton, right? And it just doesn't seem like the best way to maximize what you're doing defensively. Like, one of the things that characterized this defense when they were in LA, and this makes me think that they're still trying to, like, learn the defense a little bit, is there was a fair amount of variety on 3rd down. Variety meaning, they're going to play a little cover 4, they're going to play a little cover 6, like, they're going to play a little man-to-man coverage, right? Just throw some different pitches at you. Here, it's like, at least in the 3 games that I watched on 3rd down, it's like, it feels like it's like 80% man, and so that to me is going to be a huge storyline in this game because The thing about man coverage, if the pressure does not get home, which we're going to talk about here in a second, we can talk about it now. They're not good at pressuring on third down.
Oh, I got your pressure numbers in a second whenever you want them.
Yeah, they're not good at pressuring on third down. That shows up on film, right? Like they just aren't consistent with it. And so when you can't consistently get pressure on third down and you're playing a lot of man coverage, you just leverage that group to the T's in the back end there, and it just doesn't always work out for you. So it is a surprising choice for me watching. And the other thing I wanted to point out too, in terms of touchdowns, one of the things that I noticed, especially in the Minnesota game, is like they ran the ball effectively. They got them into single high shells, and then they were just able to play action them to death with huge chunks down the field. So that's something else I would kind of think about if you're a Commanders fan. Is this seems like a good game to kind of start establishing the run again. Let's take some shots, and then on third down, I mean, I know Jayden Daniels' passing numbers aren't as effective, but this is a different type of man because the pressure isn't quite as acute as it's been versus other teams like the Pittsburgh Steelers that play this level of man coverage.
Well, and also like your percentage, I think, are probably just lower against man coverage because you're taking so many shots, right? Like
that is probably true.
You're taking your stuff down the field, like you're taking more threes, if you will. So the number is going to be lower, but the impact is probably higher. As for the pass rush stuff, and I actually have an under center stat for you too, if you want, and on the play action side of it, the Falcons have generated 29.2% pressure rate this season. That is third lowest in the NFL. The third time, by the way, in the last 4 seasons, the Falcons have ranked in the bottom 3 for pressure. So this is who they've been for a long time. They've continually been trying to find a pass rusher. They never have a pass rush, period. Forget just a single guy. They've also sacked the opposing quarterback on just 4.6% of dropbacks in 2024, the lowest rate in the league. That is also something that is familiar to your territory for them. And I think when you watch it on tape, what you see is not just a lack of pressure where, quarterbacks are able to be comfortable and make plays, but that sack percentage being so low, even when they get some pressure, so many times quarterbacks are able to create. And they are not super sticky on their second level, especially. So, like, if you can you extend the play just a little bit, and I'm talking a pocket slide, not a full-on get out and run, although there certainly are some plays. I mean, Sam Darnold has a couple in that Minnesota game where he slides, backs up, runs around, does a do-si-do, and then all of a sudden finds Justin Jefferson 40 yards down the field for a touchdown. So there's some of that too, but I think like Bo Nix in the Denver game did a really good job of just like, let me roll out a little bit away from the little bit of pressure that I'm getting, and then the linebackers are going to drop guys, and you have a wide open receiver streaking across the field that is not only open but has room to run after the catch. So I think Jayden's ability to extend plays is really important, but it's not just as a scrambler running. He's got to make sure this is a week where he keeps his eyes down the field because there's going to be stuff available, and they're not very good at not only getting pressure but finishing at the rare times that they do.
Yeah, I couldn't say it better myself. And I think it's the thing we talked about with Philly. Like, you can break their coverage with like those second reaction plays, right? It's a very similar coverage structure, like this, like matched quarters. And this team, they're not as good at running the matched quarters. So there are dudes that are just dropped in coverage because they've, like they're trying to communicate, like I'm going to run a flat and a stick, right? And all of a sudden the corner says, I have to match the flat because we're in our match side. And the linebacker pushes through the stick, and the stick's like literally just wide open. There's nobody around him because they've both pushed through. So that's one element. And also, like, because one of the things about Philly is the rush is so comprehensive, right? It's so good. It's so quick that you never see the busted pipes in the secondary. Here, because their rush is not good, it's not super effective. Like, I literally just was like, in watching film, who are their best pass rushers? Arnold Ebiketie, he's a second-round pick from Penn State a couple years ago. He's their most effective pass rusher. He's like their third guy, right? Zach Harrison is an interior player they're like a backup player. So, like, it's just interesting to me that the guys with their highest pass rush win rate, higher pass rush efficiency numbers are all backups, kind of rotational guys, and the starters are just flat out bad in pass rushing situations. And so when that's the case, like, you're going to have opportunities to find these busted coverages that I think we talked about this in the Philly preview. In the Philly game, those aren't there because there's no time for it to come. Here, it's in your face. It's like, if I hold this ball for another beat, it's like, oh, there's the stick. There's nobody around him. Let me throw it to him. And so I think that's something that that really jumps out on film, is just the total disconnect between the rush and the coverage. And they've tried to make additions. Obviously, Matthew Judon's there. He had 16 sacks a couple years ago up in New England. Lorenzo Carter, he was up in New York a couple years ago. He had like 9 sacks. Like guys that have been productive other paces, they've played, they brought them in, and they just haven't lived up to the billing. You get Grady Jarrett, who, when I was in Atlanta, was borderline Aaron Donald level in terms of pass rush production. Obviously, Father Time waits for no man. He's still an effective player, but doesn't have that elite pass rush juice that he did. They brought in David Onyemata, I think, from New Orleans. He hasn't really lived up to the billing either. He's a good player, but hasn't really lived up to the billing as a pass rusher. So they've got these pieces that have kind of come together, and they just haven't clicked. And so, like I said, they've got guys like Arnold Ebiketie, got some juice. Zach Harrison on the interior's got some juice, but they don't play all the time. And so they can't cultivate pressure at a super high level. So it is a really interesting defense. It kind of feels like, even in talking with you now, it feels like the land of misfit toys kind of coming together as a pass rush, and you're hoping some of it works. And it just hasn't this season for them.
Yeah, for sure. You did mention about the play action under center type of stuff. Daniels this year, Jayden, has only 14 passes from under center, the second fewest amongst any of the 34 qualified quarterbacks. He's 11 of 14 for 105 yards and 2 touchdowns on those, and all 14 have been play action. So not a huge part of what they do, obviously. What Kliff is doing, they're in shotgun basically the entire game. They do run some from under center, and then obviously they do just enough booting out. I wonder how many of those are fourth downs too. I feel like there's been quite a few of those where they boot out. That, actually. And you talk about whether it's, hey, is this just going to happen on first down, on fourth down, whatever. Something you said earlier, or in your last piece of analysis there, talking about how bad the pass rushers are on first and second down. I wonder if they try to throw the ball more on first and second down this week then. You typically try to get the run game going and running on first and second down, and they've done a really good job of sticking with that because it's kind of the basis of their offense and who they want to be. But man, if you're going to have no pass rush, let's take some shots. Let's open it up. Let's try to create some space so that you can, you don't be afraid of 2nd and 10 kind of week. And I think that certainly could be in the game plan. So with that, one, thoughts on that. 2, what about Atlanta's rush defense and when they do attack things on the ground?
Yeah, so I'm really glad you brought that up, because to me, they kind of, again, much like Philly, they want to get into some different personnels up front. So they're getting a 4-down spacing, right, which is like your 4-2, 4 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers kind of spacing. They get in their odd spacing, which is 3 down kind of defensive tackle type bodies, and then 4 linebackers with 2 kind of big edge players. And they get into kind of their big nickel, which is kind of the same thing. It's like 3 big guys, 2 big edges, and then 1 linebacker. They're all those other guys are classified as linebackers, but it kind of looks like a 5-1 in terms of defensive look. And I kind of feel like that's their best personnel to stop the run on first down. Their middle linebacker, Caden Ellis, is a pretty good football player and kind of gets everybody lined up. But like I said, all those dudes I just talked about are not great in pass rushing situations, right? So they're better stopping the run out of that front and out of that spacing, but they're not great at it. And then I think the other thing too is one of the things that makes Philly, or I appreciate about Philly more after watching this team, is they've got a really good nose guard in Jordan Davis. Eddie Goldman is their nose. I played with him in Chicago. He's a former first-round pick. He's a fine nose, but playing nose for a long time in the NFL is tough. So he kind of gets blown off the ball a little bit. David Onyemata is not like a run-stopping player. Grady Jarrett's very good, but a little undersized. He's explosive, but if you can get hands on him, he's not big. So you do see guys kind of really change the line of scrimmage on these players. And the other thing too is they're perimeter players. So their Lorenzo Carter, Matthew Judon, they're not super great at setting edges. It's a very average front, I'm going to say. And I don't mean that disparagingly. They're not excellent at anything. And so when it's like, hey, we have a wrinkle here, we can run the football. Yes. Hey, we can hit play action. Yes, because they get sticky on blocks and they don't rush the passer well. So I do think getting them in that kind of big personnel to throw the football is not a bad idea. And if you get them in sub at all, they're just not big enough and strong enough up front. For example, they play a two point 6 technique, which is like I'm in a 2-point, like in like a jamming position for like a receiver, and I'm head up over the tight end. Like you cannot stop the run from that posture, and you're going to get blown out the club, which they do all the time. So schematically, there's just a lot of stuff where I'm kind of like, I wouldn't do that if I was a defensive coordinator, just from putting guys in good positions to be successful. And then even when they are in a good position to be successful, guys don't tend to win one-on-one. So I think you can run the football in the right looks, obviously, and that's something that Kliff and Anthony Lynn got to figure out. And then I think the play action stuff, if you have run the football, becomes super, super potent because, for example, against Minnesota, they're triggering that safety down in the box. They're in this cover 3 shell. They don't do a lot of cover 3, and they're just hitting shots over top. So I do think it's kind of all on the table for you. You got to earn it. You got to sequence it. You got to call the right plays, but I think it should all be there for you.
Yeah. So first thing on the running stuff from Quinn on Tuesday, he was asked about, kind of getting the run game back going. He's like, man, we can't miss the top of the pyramid. We can't miss the top of the pile. We got to be physical. Like we're not firing off the ball. We're not hitting people. And, he's like, all our offensive linemen are so smart. And they're like, oh, we got to hit we got to go this way for this guy. We got to target this here. And he's like, guys, make the mistake. Just do it quickly. Just like, let's go. And he didn't feel like in the Eagles game, like in, who was the game prior? The Saints game, that they had that. And the last time that this was like a big talking point was going into Tennessee, and they blew the Titans off the ball and rushed for 250 yards. So I do wonder how much they're thinking about that this week. Obviously, they want to establish it whenever they do run the ball. They want to be physical. They want to fire off the ball. They want to hit people. They want to give these guys a chance to go downhill. And that's going to be a huge deal. But like we talked about, the better option might be actually throwing the ball on first and second down out of some of these looks and then take your rushes where you get them. So that's something I think about from earlier in the week when Quinn spoke on Tuesday about the physicality. Something else that I think is worth asking you about, I had Mitch Tischler on, as I typically do on Tuesdays on the radio show, and he's like, earlier in the year, the Commanders got away with all this misdirection stuff where they're pulling people away from the play and they're doing all this cool stuff. And now it seems like teams are kind of onto that, and it might be time to mix it up. Do you think there's any truth to that in the run scheme, that teams are kind of sitting on some of this misdirection? And obviously, if you're pulling guys away from the point of attack, if the linebackers and the defense doesn't follow the fake, now you're just outmanned at the point of attack. So that maybe that is a factor in some of the Commanders' run struggles the last couple of weeks.
I mean, maybe a little bit. I personally, I'd have to talk to Mitch specifically about what he's referencing, because sometimes people see 1 or 2 plays and they say, oh, this is the narrative for the whole game. And I haven't seen a ton of that. Again, one of the things that they do really well is they run pin pull stuff. So they're going to, pull on GT, they're going to pull the backside guard and tackle on counter. They're going to, on the bounce stuff, they're going to back block. And so one of the things that I feel like I've noticed more is that teams just say, we're going to get a lot of singles. Let's be really vertical in terms of our penetration, specifically the Eagles, specifically New Orleans. And when you get that kind of stuff, those plays to me are less effective. They can hit big if you get that back block worked out and the puller gets around and all that kind of stuff. But I do think every run has a little bit of kryptonite. And one of the things about a bounce play, having blocked a bounce play, is you have to eliminate penetration. So the first thing that they do, if they get a lot of penetration, it's going to muck it up. You're going to lose blockers to the front side, right? Because a guy's going to, let's say I'm the tight end to the front side of a run, and the 5 technique or the 6 just penetrates off my inside shoulder. I'm on the right side, let's say, and I block him, but I pick the second puller. So now there's a free linebacker directly in the hole, right? And I don't care how much misdirection we use, we are just short hats. And so sometimes misdirection's good. It's very helpful. Sometimes the target's a little bit off. And again, we talked about this in the Philly game. We talked about this in the New Orleans game. To me, that's the bigger thing, is they've kind of taken turns making physical mistakes, making mental mistakes. I don't know if they're actually mental mistakes, but making targeting mistakes. And then they just don't execute the block sometimes. And so to me, it's those factors more than anything. And I think, for example, when I was here with Mike, this is relevant. We ran a lot of outside zone. And so teams would have a really hard time with that early in the season because we ran it differently than everybody. We just sprinted off the ball, almost like we ran straight to the sideline. And so teams were like, we're not going to run with you anymore. We're going to set a super hard edge. We're going to have this defensive end sprint up the field. And they changed how they played our run scheme. And it made it harder for us to be good at that. And so I think that's now why you see Kyle and Sean and Matt LaFleur and all these guys around the league deploying more different varieties of runs because it demands different fits. So that's something where I'd say is, when we talked about wrinkles last week versus Philly, like, is there a wrinkle that gives you something else off of a similar look that takes advantage of them being hyper aggressive up the field? And that's why we said trap and wham and all that stuff. But this is where game planning and self-scouting becomes super important, because this is the thing that makes this run hard. How do we hurt them if they're going to play it this way? And again, that's a long kind of roundabout way. I have not seen the Atlanta Falcons play any techniques that would give this team a hard time on the runs they want to run. So to me, I'm like, do what you do. Get in there, get after them, and run GT, run bounce, and devil be damned. Obviously, if you're running it to Grady Jarrett, you need to be aware of him as a penetrator, but he's the only one. So if you can account for him, scheme him up, you should be okay. So again, like, all that to say, like, that shouldn't matter as much in this game, but it's a good conversation.
Yeah, I think it's the fine balance between doing the things that you want to do that you're good at and knowing that those things are what the defense is expecting. And so if the other team knows you like GT, they're going to be prepared for GT. And so I do wonder if there is a side of Kliff or Anthony Lynn or whoever else. It's like, let's just run some inside zone this week. Like, let's just run some duo this week. And like, let's let our guys just get downhill and get forward. Like, let's just, hey, Allegretti, Biotish, Cosme, like, fire off the ball and hit someone. Straightforward, no pulling, just like get in that stance with a lot of forward momentum, and as soon as that ball is snapped, you go smash the person in front of you. And that reestablishes the physicality. It also is a bit of a change-up. And against a lighter Atlanta front, maybe that's not the worst idea schematically. But like you said, if they're also not great at, getting up the field, penetrating, and on some of these runs that have a lot higher, not that inside zone can't hit, or outside zone or whatever, like Saquon Barkley or one of those backs are take anything. But if you're a guy like B-Rob, like, you probably need that clean head start to get up the field, a la some of the stuff we saw against Tennessee, where there's some lead blockers in front, some pullers that are getting up to the second level kind of more naturally, and you get that big play explosive ability. So I think it's something that's going to be interesting to see, not only this week, but also, Dallas did such a great job the first time around. And I also even think of, like, New Orleans was a team that we thought they would run all over, and they didn't. And there's like a little piece of me that's scared because of that too. And it's like, man, what happened against New Orleans when you thought you were going to run all over them? And is there a chance that Atlanta could have some kind of similar success?
Well, I think that's a great point. And one of the things when you watch New Orleans, and I think you said this, I think in the preview show, it's like there's a physicality that they play with in New Orleans, specifically on the edges. You're like, maybe this is problematic. Again, the interior is not great, and they made changes, and they're an NFL team and all that kind of stuff. But like, they're a big front, man. Like, I was out there pregame and I was watching them warm up, and they just don't have that same type of body type here. You know what I mean? They're not super big in the front. They're not super physical on the edges. Like, that's the thing, is like, New Orleans, ever since I played, which is like probably 15 years ago now, they characterized by having like just 280-pound edge players, and they don't have that.
Which,
here.
by the way, is hilarious because Cam Jordan's been the guy since you were playing. Yeah,
and like, they've just been like, we want more of Cam Jordan's, and so everyone they bring in there is like that, just like 6'6", 275, 280, and they play harder than you think is physically possible for a guy that big, and they've got 4 of them. And so that's going to be tough. You're going to lose a lot of one-on matchups that way. Here, again, the techniques that they play, like, they're in these 2 points on the perimeter. That's harder to set run edges, right? In my opinion, just having played like that, I prefer playing against a 2-point when they have to set a hard edge, because they can't get into you the same way, right? I think the interior guys are good, but not great. They just don't have great anchors. And I think there is a lot of opportunity here. And again, this is an NFL defense. They know what they're doing, but there is an opportunity here to run the football. And you just got to be selective about when you do it and kind of embrace that mindset stuff that Dan was talking about. Because I do think, like, again, Caden Ellis, their middle linebacker, is a really good player. He shows up a lot. He flashes. He gets downhill, all those types of things. But he's one person in the front. So how do you account for him? And then how do you block Jesse Bates? How do you block Justin Simmons with receivers and account for them in motions, because they're pretty good run fit players? But I think you can get after this front, and that's if I'm Dan, that's my message or Kliff. That's my message to them. It's like, get after these dudes this week. Be physical with these guys and win these one-on-ones. And I think like that's what I'd like to see, is this team get back to what they did versus versus Tennessee. Because one of the things is if you get them in a 4-down spacing, so you get in your nickel packages, right? They'll give you good spacing in the front. So take advantage of it is kind of what I'm saying. Like you can dictate to them with personnel, and when you get those opportunities, take advantage and let's kick some ass.
Yeah, I would love to leave it there, but there's one other thing that we have to mention, which is you better beware of their safeties when you throw the football.
Yeah.
Simmons, obviously one of the best intercepting safeties in the last decade in the league, all pro from Denver, who came over in the offseason. Certainly someone that we were wondering if Washington would take a peek at when he was on the market for quite a while. But ultimately, he winds up in Atlanta pairing with Jesse Bates, who came over from Cincinnati in free agency a few years ago. And man, is he a good player, a potential all-pro. Jesse Bates, he's playing that well at the safety position, turnover-wise and play creation-wise. So what if you're coaching up Jayden this week and you're Tavita and you're Kliff and you're all the guys that are in his ear, you obviously want him to stay aggressive. You want him to hey, you don't want him to play tentative. But how are you coaching him up to make sure that they know where 3 and 31 are? The offense does, and especially where Jayden knows where those guys are at all times.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly it. I'm like, this is a guy you got to be aware of at all times. And we talked about on third down specifically, they kind of run that lurk coverage where he's the weak side safety and he's running and kind of filling his zone and just reading the quarterback's eyes. Like, just be aware that that's what he's doing. So maybe I got to be a little bit more disciplined with my eyes right down the middle of the field. And if I'm running a crossing route, like just know that that's where he's going to be. You know what I mean? So like, don't, that being said, as a play caller, I can call stuff that maybe it helps Jayden eliminate some of those kind of middle of the field throws. You can't go an entire game without them, but I think I could be helpful with that. But I'd say like that's it. Like I discipline down the middle of the field. Make sure you control him because he's reading and he's very good at it. He's got great ball skills. He's competitive at the catch point. All those things that make him dangerous and make him the playmaker you're talking about. So yeah, the first coaching point is just know where he's at every single time. Is he the post player? Is he the lurk player? And if he is one of those things, like how are we going to call and how are we going to execute the play accordingly? And I'm also talking to the receivers. I'm like, if he's there, make sure you're taking friendly angles to the ball so that we protect our quarterback if he does make a bad decision. So all those things are on at the forefront of the conversation because, like you said, he's the best player in the defense and he's one of the better safeties in the NFL, if not the best safety in the NFL at tracking and making these explosive plays on the football. He's also very good in run support. Like he's just a good football player, man. Like he is a fun football player to watch and he shows up on the film and he's dangerous. And so he's definitely someone you got to be thinking about. Kind of in the same vein as like Budda Baker a little bit for the Arizona Cardinals. Like Budda's a little bit more sporadic, a little bit more all over the place, a little bit more like a Tasmanian devil. There's much more consistency to Jesse Bates' game because of how they are using him. But he does make a lot of plays, and they are devastating. And coming off a 2-interception game, like when Dan, every time he talked to him, was like, we're about the ball, protect the ball. Jayden's done a great job protecting the ball. It all starts and ends, in my opinion, with where number 3's at for them defensively.
Last thing I'll just tack on here, fun little sports radio-y prediction that if it goes wrong, no one will remember, and if it goes right, I'll look like a genius. calling a Luke McCaffrey screen touchdown in the high red.
Okay.
They've given up quite a few of them this year. Screen touchdowns. We know Kliff loves the screen in the high red. We're talking like 15 to 20 yards out down there in the red zone. And I think that they're going to want to get Luke a couple of looks over these next couple of games in those after he had the big one last week and he's shown it on kickoff return. Luke McCaffrey, like 18-yard screen touchdown. I'm just throwing it out there into the universe, Logan, as a possibility.
Don't hate it, man. Don't hate it.
Take Command Podcast, Logan Paulson there, Craig Hoffman here, and it is Game 2 for Michael Penix, the rookie quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons, coming in relief of Kirk Cousins. And the first game was not much of a test, Logan. He got the New York Giants, who are not playing good football, to be very, very kind about it. Now he's Sunday Night Football on the road, potentially in the rain, against a Commanders defense that really locked it down for the final 3 quarters against Philadelphia. And it's funny, I got a stat for you that really proves why the Falcons went to Michael Penix. Kirk, obviously the interceptions and things just not going well, but their offense has the ability to be so much more dynamic with him. Penix was used in a design rollout on 24.1% of his dropbacks last week, his first start. That is the 8th highest by a qualified passer in a game this season. Kirk's rollout rate in weeks 1 through 15 when he was the starter, 2.3%, Logan. 2.3%. So, yeah, they wanted to be able to open up their offense a little bit. And I think, obviously, they were able to do that some against the Giants. They probably shut things down towards the end because they were up by a ton. What do you see from this Falcons offense, and what do you expect in Penix week 2?
This is a fun and kind of a dangerous group, and I mean the playmakers that they talk about are storied at this point. You got Bijan Robinson, you got Drake London, Ray McLeod is an explosive kind of slot player. Darnell Mooney's kind of seeing a career resurgence here, and it's an impressive, really an impressive group of playmakers. And you couple that with an offensive line that maybe doesn't get the pub that the Detroit's or the Philly does, but a very, very good group in the front, in terms of how they run outside zone specifically. And one of the things you talked about there is this team is they've mastered outside zone. When you want to see what does outside zone look like in the NFL now, you watch the Atlanta Falcons. And so one of the things that makes outside zone so effective is the ability to run boots and keepers off of that action. And so when Kirk was in the offense, they just couldn't do it. Just wasn't a part of, I think physically, he's obviously still kind of dealing with the Achilles. He just couldn't do it. And obviously you mentioned in the New York game how they used Penix and how they were able to kind of get him on the perimeter, and he'd made great decisions with those. And I wasn't sure how he'd do because he didn't really do a lot of that at UW. But one of the things that sticks out to me after watching the film, and again, it's one game against a team that is maybe the worst team in the NFL, is how much more effective the offense was with him, right? How much more grass the defense now has to defend, right? Because not only can he do the boots and the keepers and the kind of waggle play action, shots down the field, but he has a live arm, a big arm, in kind of countering what Kirk has been. Kirk has been a guy who throws with great anticipation, understanding that he doesn't have the strongest arm in the world. Penix is kind of the antithesis of that. He can touch anywhere. He can take on the right hash, throwing a comeback to the left and get that thing on a frozen rope. And it's just impressive. And so I think that's the thing about him that's probably the most scary, is that all of a sudden now the field feels really big. And that's the thing you don't want to be dealing with as a defensive coordinator. You want that field to feel nice and small and compact. And that's kind of what Kirk was giving you. But now you've got the keepers, the boots, like we just talked about, which again, that affects how I rush, that affects how I fit runs. And then also his ability to kind of touch deeper down the field on these shot plays with explosive playmakers. And you can tell he's still working on his chemistry with Drake London, but if that gets worked out, Drake London, I think I've talked to you about this, I think is on the precipice of becoming a top 10 wide receiver in the NFL. He is very dynamic. He can play in the slot. He can play out wide. He's got great short area quickness. He's hyper competitive at the catch point. He's an impressive dude to watch. And so if they kind of get that figured out where, hey, I can throw you a back shoulder whenever I want. I think he missed 2 to him in the game. But if they get that kind of back shoulder ability, he's a guy that, it's a 50-50 jump ball. Drake London, no, he's more than that. And so that's the thing about this game that all of a sudden feels a little bit sketchy to me. It's now all of a sudden you have way more grass to defend. You have way more elements of the quarterback to defend. And also he's a 4-5 guy, and he scrambled a little bit in this game, which is something he didn't do a lot in college. That's an other element of his game that you need to be aware of. So I'm not saying he's, the next, he's, he's not
the
rookie, right? He's not that guy, but he makes this offense significantly more potent and way more dangerous. And it'll be really interesting to see what Joe Wood Jr. does, because to me, it's you talk about what he's doing for him and kind of how he's expanded the field. Their rushing efficiency is crazy. Watching Bijan run outside zone is amazing. And then you pair that with Tyler Algier, who's the hammer, they just are really good. And so for a team in Washington that, struggled stopping the run, obviously they did a great job last week. How do you kind of deal with this offense with a lot of playmakers?
Yeah, couple of things to touch on there. On Penix's mobility, listening back to the TV broadcast, I was watching the condensed game back from last week, and Kevin Kugler and Daryl Johnston, who had the game for Fox, were saying that, hey, the Atlanta coaching staff told us don't be surprised if Penix takes off. Like, he wasn't known as a mobile guy. He didn't really do it at UW, but I think it's because he was told, like, don't run at Washington. And now it's like, hey, like, you're free. Go. And even though he's had the knee surgeries and whatever else, like he has that club in his bag. He's not super dynamic as a runner by any stretch, but if you give him green grass and just let him run straight, like, he can take it and slide and extend
fast
drives. And yeah, he's just straight up 4.5. Like, you can move. As far as London goes, God, watching him is fun. He's so quarterback friendly too. The first catch of the game he has last week runs just like your stereotypical square in, but he comes back with it and, like, just make sure that he gives Penix a good clean target. And as a big bodied guy, super competitive. That's one where we don't know, as we're recording this on Thursday morning, what Marshawn Lattimore's injury status is, but
right.
I would imagine if Lattimore is playing that he is shadowing London the entire game. And then you trust Sainer still on Darnell Mooney, and you go from there. But it is definitely a huge deal if Marshawn Lattimore is not going to be able to play, obviously, but especially with a guy in Drake London that is that big, that physical, and that competitive, like you said. But as for the running game, which is kind of the center of it all, Logan, you mentioned their mastery of outside zone. How about this from Next Gen Stats? Falcons rushers have been contacted behind the line of scrimmage on just 39.6 of their design rushes outside the tackle this season, the third lowest rate in the NFL. The Falcons have rushed outside on 69.7% of their design runs, the second highest rate in the NFL. So they're running that outside zone. And outside zone is one where you do get a lot of hits behind the line of scrimmage, because if one guy gets up the field, and because it's not like a straight ahead run where you're to the line of scrimmage quickly. Like, there's so much of that run that is spent behind the line of scrimmage, and you're taking that risk, because if that cutback hits, you're talking about a big gain. And so there is a high risk there. And so that number being that low I think kind of shows, one, the ability of the offensive line to block it up. And two, there are times where Bijan perhaps makes a guy completely whiff and there is no contact behind the line of scrimmage, even though there was a penetrating defender, because Bijan is that elusive.
Yeah, I mean, there's just like a silky smoothness to his running style. And I'm kind of surprised, I guess, that he hasn't had more explosive runs this year, because he is so effective at making people miss in the hole and, making people miss behind line of scrimmage. Like, I don't want to say he's the best back in the NFL, because you got Saquon, you got Derrick Henry, but to me, he's, of the people that I've watched this year, he feels like the third best guy. And he's running behind a really solid group. Obviously, Chris Lindstrom, Caleb McGarry, Drew Dahlman's having a great year. Jake Matthews is still playing at a high level. Like, that's a good, consistent group. They're not the most physical, mauling. It's very different than Philadelphia, for example, the team we just played, in terms of how they get to their runs and what they do. But they do kind of a wide. They kind of are like, we are an outside zone team, and we're going to run outside zone 12 different ways, and we have a back who can elevate. And then the other thing is, like, if it's a little bit dicey, we can't, we're having a hard time. We've got Tyler Algiers, who's also playing at a higher level. Like, in terms of back tandem, to me, they're kind of in the same pantheon as, like, the Detroit guys, and they don't get as much pub because they play in Atlanta, but it's a good group. So to me, the number one thing to be worried about in this game, we talked a lot about Michael Penix, we talked about Drake London. It's like, you got to slow them down in terms of efficiency, right? In terms of how efficient they are running the football. And this is going to be a different test than what we've seen the past couple of weeks, because there's a schematic kind of nuance to what they do. And then obviously, which, because of all the motions and the shifts and the pre-snap stuff they do, think like kind of pseudo Tampa Bay-ish with some of the stuff that they do, right? Like, where it's like, we're going to jet motion, we're going to shift and hit you back with this. And it's like a little bit like, going to test your rules, going to test your fits. And you can't play super heavy boxes to him, I don't think, because of Penix at the quarterback spot. So it's going to be a really interesting day in terms of presenting a matchup or finding a way to slow them down running the football, I think. So I really don't envy Joe Witt Jr. this week. If Penix can produce the same way he did last week. And again, like, he was super efficient. I think his completion percentage was very high. He had 4 drops. His interception, the receiver basically handed the guy the ball. Like,
he had Kyle Pitts in the hands. Rookie mistake.
Yeah. And so, if Penix can play with that level of efficiency and they can run the ball the way they have been running it, this is going to be a tough defensive kind of, what do you take away? What's more important? And I would probably lean towards taking away the running game and just say, hey, Penix, try to beat us from the pocket.
Yeah, I would 100% do that. I would play with a lot of single safety, just chin down in the box. Quan, you're responsible for center field. Marshawn, if you're playing, we're trusting you on London, and let's see what's going on from there. The other big thing you mentioned, that, like, is Bijan the best back in the league? Like, probably not. Like, it feels wrong to put him over Saquon and Derrick Henry, but he does statistically have the most missed tackles in the league.
He's exceptional, man. He's exceptional.
The first commander he makes miss on Sunday, I'm going to assume that there's going to be at least one, will be his 100th forced missed tackle of the season. That said, yeah. Wow. So he's got 99 coming into this game, which is the most. Here, hold on. Let me go back to the stat. 99 missed tackles this season, most in the NFL, and tied for 4th most by any player through the first 16 weeks of a season since 2018. So Dang. We're talking about a premier player playing at a very high level. However, the Commanders have recorded the 5th lowest missed tackle rate on run plays this season. On all plays, the Commanders have the 3rd lowest missed tackle rate. So the Commanders, after like week 1, week 2, where they missed a bunch of tackles, have really cleaned that up. And that has been kind of a point of pride this season, that they do not miss a ton of tackles. And I feel like sometimes even when they do, like, they rally pretty immediately. So that's going to be really important this weekend. But I think that the offensive line in general, like, that is the key, not only in the run game, but Penix last week was pressured quite a bit, but he got the ball out so fast it didn't matter. I think it was 2.47 seconds to throw. So you're talking like light. That's like Tua levels of getting the ball out. And so can the Commanders actually get home? Can the Commanders, one, be stickier on the back end than the Giants were and force Penix to hold the football? And 2, can they get home in a way that the Giants had no shot at last week? And I think, part of this is their pressure packages, where they are really dynamic in what they do with Luvu moving around and with Bobby moving around. And we'll see, if John Allen's back this week. They've used Payne in some funky alignments. Like, do they get John in some of those as well? And I think that's going to be fun to watch, because watching the Giants try to blitz the Falcons was like almost comical at times. How well the Falcons' offensive line slid, picked everything up, kept Penix clean, and then he's able to get rid of the ball quickly. And against a much better organized blitzing team, can they repeat that kind of performance? I think that's a huge key for this one for Washington, is the ability to actually get pressure on a rookie in a way that New York did not at all last week.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because like, this team, this offensive line specifically, is kind of they're built with a bunch of run blockers. And that's not to say they can't pass protect, but like, in my mind, this team is like, it's like kind of the problem that like 90s Broncos teams run into. Like, they're really good at running outside zone. They're not great. So like, outside zone, play action pass, keeper's boots, right? They're really good at running that stuff. But in like straight drop back situations, they're not like great. Caleb McGarry, I was there when they drafted him. I think he's a good football player. It's been cool to see him kind of save his career and figure it out. But versus speed rushers in drop back situations, not great, right? Jake Matthews, again, is one of the most savvy players you'll ever be around, but doesn't handle power rushers very well. Like, there are some elements to them as a drop back team that if I'm the offensive coordinator, I'm really, really aware of. The thing is, like, they've built this thing so that they don't have to be in those situations that often. But to your point, like, when they are in those situations and you can kind of corral the quarterback, make him hold the football, I do think there are wins there in terms of creating pressures and giving opportunities to kind of switch the game with sacks and turnovers in that regard. So I think that's a great point. And I think it's also reinforced from like a personnel and just like a roster construction kind of position.
Yeah, I would just blitz the hell out of them the entire game. Like, honestly, if I'm Joe Witt, I would just say, we're going to run blitz you. We're going to pass blitz you. Like, every blitz that we got, we're just going to throw it at you and try to mess up. You're so good at blocking outside zone. Well, what happens if there's an extra dude in somewhere random? Like, can you do that? Now, the Commanders have one of the highest explosive run rates against in the league. I think fans probably intuitively feel that, emotionally feel that. So sometimes that can backfire, and against a back like Bijan, that's dangerous. But I do think that just like, hey, we're bringing pressure no matter what, and we're going to trust our back end is probably the way to go in this one. Anything else from either personnel, like what you expect from John Allen, or what they do without Lattimore, or, I mean, we kind of covered some of this, or anything else that I haven't mentioned that we want to get to from this game before we head on out of here and wait anxiously all day on Sunday for Sunday Night Football?
It's weird. Like this feels like one of the better offenses that we've played this year. Like, I'm just thinking back, like, I like Philly. They've got explosive playmakers, but in terms of like what the offense is, it's very kind of static. Like, this is what we do. New Orleans, obviously with a backup quarterback, not great. Tennessee with, Will Levis, not great. And then all of a sudden you get this group coming in off this Giants game. You're like, man, they're really effective running the ball. They've got well-designed pass concepts. They've got a guy, at least in one game, has shown ability to get the ball there. And so I'm kind of curious, honestly, to see how they handle some of the mental elements of this, right? Because it's not going to be Philly where it's like, hey, we're throwing it to A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith. Like, we dare you to take them away. And when we're running, we're going to bring in more tight ends. We're going to run the ball. It's not like that. It's a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more kind of tendency breaking. So I'm kind of curious to see how the defense does. I think, they can win physical matchups, but there's like a mental side to this game that's going to be a little bit more challenging. And I really can't wait to watch. And I think the other thing too, which I feel like we've talked about every week, but it's so important to touch on, is that if the offense can support the defense, right? Possess the football, go on long drives, find points, then I think it alleviates some of the pressure that Joe Witt Jr. is experiencing, right? To say, oh, we have to stop the run. We have to blitz. Like, I can be a little bit more conservative, a little bit bend but don't break. And I think they've had a lot of success with that formula over the course of this season. So again, I think it's important just to remind myself that this is a team that needs to play complementary football at all times. And if they can, then some of the risky stuff that you just talked, which I actually think schematically is a good idea, like, let's run blitz, let's get penetrators, let's do some things here, let's blitz on third down. Like, we don't need to be as aggressive because our offense is going to kind of support us and keep us in a positive game flow. So I think that's something really interesting. And it's one of those things where by the end of these shows, I'm always like, I wonder what they're going to do. I wonder if this is how this looks, because you've kind of talked through all of these different things. And that's one thing specifically that I'm really curious about.
For sure. I feel like at the end of every single week, I'm like, oh, the Commanders are going to win this weekend, no matter what, because you talk about all the things they need to do to win, and you start to think about what happens if they happen. But it's a great challenge, and that's what you have to kind of snap out of that and be like, oh, yeah, but it's hard. They actually have to do them. And if they do on Sunday, though, Logan, they are in the playoffs. 11 wins for the first time since the early 90s. Just an exceptional season in year one of the Dan Quinn, Adam Peters, Jayden Daniels era. And we also should know, I mean, frankly, by the time some people are listening to this, we might even have a better idea of the playoff hopes for Washington, because the Seattle-Chicago game is tonight. That I'm anticipating the Bears upsetting the Seahawks, but who knows? But we're getting to the point in the season with only 2 games remaining, and with Washington playing the second to last game of the weekend, we might know if Washington is in before kickoff, which in some ways would be even more fun, because then it becomes like this stress-free coronation of a game as opposed to a like stress fest. Oh my God, they have to win this to get in. But either way, should be a lot of fun at Northwest Stadium on Sunday night. We are going to do live post game. There is no telling how that's going to go. It's going to be way past my bedtime, but we will be live Sunday night / early Monday morning on YouTube at the Team 980, at 106.7 The Fan, at Craig Hoffman for the post-game show. And if you are going to bed right after the game, it will be in your podcast feed in the morning. So we'll see you then. See you at the game. Again, if you're going to the game and it's not raining and you want me to stop by your tailgate, shoot me a message on Instagram at Hoffman.sports. Anthony Haney, my radio producer, and I are going to be perusing the parking lots unless it's raining, and then I'll be inside. That's our show. We'll see you on Sunday night. Commanders, Falcons. Can't wait. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.